I'm going to deal with a few specific issues. And the reason we do that is because anytime you speak on anything generally, people go home and they have no idea what you said. So we'll get real specific about some stuff, especially pertaining to youth ministry, because some things have changed over time. Some things have stayed the same, but some things have changed, and we have to adjust the way that we're addressing some of it. So one thing that we've been harping on a lot back home is media. And it's really the primary way that they pick up anything from the world is through the media they consume. And when I say they, I mean us. I mean all of us. The media that we consume is out of control. The average American, this is not age specific, consumes, whether actively or passively, consumes 11 hours of media per day. You say, how does that work? If there's a radio playing in the background, that counts. That's the passive entertainment. That's the passive media. But through the phones, that counts with emails, it counts through text, all that stuff. 11 hours of digital or video or audio media per day. 11 hours. That's staggering. Just a reminder, there's only 24 hours in a day. We're not present for 8 of them. 11 hours of media that we're consuming all the time. It's unbelievable. A little over half of Americans who are Christian, who identify as Christian, a little over half say that they pray daily. 23% of Christians in the United States say they pray almost never at all. It's really only during matters of crisis. Among those who pray daily, this is that a little bit more than half, among them, the average prayer time per day is about 10 minutes. So here's what we have. We have 11 hours versus 10 minutes. We have 11 hours of the world bombarding us. We have 10 minutes where we're talking to God. And the statistics don't change that much whenever you consider people who would be thought of as active Christians who are heavily involved. The statistics don't change that much because they're often so busy during the day that 10 minutes still stays the same. And they're still taking in this passive media. Does anybody remember, none of y'all are going to remember this, I'm too old. Does anybody remember something called Everyone's Connected? Oh, thank goodness. Have you ever wondered, were the people that made that website, did one of them say, who are these people? Because we were it. We were the only people on Everyone's Connected. It was just apostolic people. And they had to be looking on there what's happened on our website? Cult is taking over our site. That was the early days of social media. We were on it all the time. We were on MySpace. If you were not on the top 8 friends or whatever, if you got taken off somebody's top 8 friends, that was earth-shattering. But now, 11 hours of media per day. Last year, out of the 255 shows that Netflix put in the teen recommended category, 104 of them, so not quite half, probably about 40%, were rated mature. So what kind of content's allowed under mature? Graphic nudity, graphic violence, graphic language. Basically everything except all out pornography. That's kind of it. Everything else is fine. So about 40% of the media that's marketed to them is graphic. 40%. Psalm 101:3 says, I will set no worthless thing before my eyes. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not fasten its grip on me. A perverse heart shall depart from me. I will know no evil. It shall not fasten its grip to me. Our young people, y'all know, the primary way that the world gets its grip around their throat is through the media they're consuming, whether it's social media, whether it's what they're watching, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Reddit. Let me tell you something about Reddit. It's a lot of young guys on there. It is a cesspool of anti-God thinking. That's what it is. And that's what they're consuming constantly. So you hear this passage, I will know no evil. We have far too much knowledge now of what is evil and far too little knowledge of what is holy. And to say this in 2021, look, 10 years ago, people would have gotten angrier at me if I said this. Because everybody was like, oh, it's got an attitude about it. They just wanted to watch whatever at that time. But over the past decade, there's been this renewed hunger to be separate from the ideas of the world. And people are actually getting on board with this all of a sudden. They're wanting to detach because they know it's doing something to them. They can't put their finger on exactly what it is, but they're trying to pull back now. I remember when I was young, VHS was the way that you watched anything. We didn't have a TV, we had a monitor. So we had a VHS player, Be Kind, Rewind. And we were allowed to watch Swiss Family Robinson 1,000 times in educational videos. I don't know what an educational video was. It never entered our VHS player. I don't know what that was. And then my mom would kill me. One day when my dad went out of town to preach, my mom let us watch Star Wars. And that's how it all began. That's everything. Later on, that's where the T-shirts began, right? So like that's where it started happening. Like, what have we done to our son? Why is he not interested in baseball anymore? And that was PG, and so that was like the door opening. And then whenever I got older, I noticed that all my friends, like everything we watched in the 90s was PG-13. Now, our parents didn't know about it because we would just rotate over whose parents were involved in something that night, so they weren't at the house. We just rotated. It was like a tour of friends' homes to watch any Jim Carrey movie that came out in the 1990s. And by the way, if you were, I'm not encouraging you, if you go back and watch some of the movies that people watched in the 90s and talked about all the time, I didn't realize how bad a lot of them were. Had no idea. It should make us, like, now I'm going old man mode, I'm sorry. But it should make us super uncomfortable when people take the name of God in vain. The 90s were like the golden era of doing that. Had no idea. So then it elevated until finally, when I'm in youth ministry, I find out that my kids are watching The Wolf of Wall Street at somebody's house. I don't know what's in The Wolf of Wall Street, so I get online and I look at commonsensemedia.org and find out what's in The Wolf of Wall Street. So just kind of, F word is used only 569 times. The language is strong and consistent throughout. There's plenty more where that is. Many of the characters are shown briefly having graphic sex with prostitutes and other women. In one scene, the main character uses cocaine, and I cannot finish the description of what happened in the scene without being struck dead by God in the pulpit because it has no place being said in a church or the guy's dorm. There's copious nudity throughout. A graphic shot of a large orgy of men is shown. Drug usage is also rampant. All of this took place at a member of our church's house, and I found out later that the Blu-ray belonged to the dad, who was a faithful member of our church. So we've come a long way from Swiss Family Robinson, and then we wonder why people struggle so much with the ideas of the world creeping their way in. Look, youth ministry, when we talk, it is perfectly okay to let them know that we don't have any place watching any of this. No place. But we're worried about I say this, a lot of people are worried about what's going to push young people away when we preach about this kind of stuff. We have to. We have to. Media and all its available mediums have done more to shape the attitudes, the vernacular, the ideologies, the politics, the core beliefs than anything the church has put out for our young people. Much more. I don't think it's even close. Because they've got them for 5 days a week. They've got them for really a day and a half. They're shaping their minds. They're developing these habits right now. And it's up to the entire fivefold ministry, that includes youth ministry, to teach about media again as strongly as people used to. But there's a way to do it. To get up there and just say, get it out of your home. I agree with the sentiment. I agree with it. You got to tell them why. You got to give them the scriptures that are plain as day. Deliver it to them and say, this is why, that's not our values. And if you absorb it all the time, and you're never praying, if you absorb it all the time and you don't pray to God, how do you think that your mind is going to be shaped? We can tell them this stuff deliberately, carefully, with the Word of God taking preeminence in the whole conversation. So this is what I was looking at it earlier this year because we were teaching our church, and then they said they could edit stuff out, so maybe. The dad whose DVD it was, or the Blu-ray it was in attendance that morning. And I made eye contact with him as I was describing what was in the movie. I was like, and it has 568 F words. And he's just going, why did I say that? I don't know why I said that. Oh, because we were talking this with all of our parents and with all of our adult congregation. And I'll go back to Lot in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in Genesis 19 and 15, it says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters. They dragged them out of Sodom. They had to drag them out of the place that had fire and brimstone raining down from heaven. For the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. Now, everybody wants to talk about his wife turning into a pillar of salt. In this story, I'm very interested in what happens in between the lines. From the time that he set up his tent in his house facing towards Sodom, and then the time that he moved into Sodom. Why did he move into Sodom? He was just living with his tents faced towards it. What happened? I'm interested in that period of time. I'll tell you what I think happened. This is not extra biblical. This is just kind of common sense when you see it. How did it get to the point where the angels had to drag him out of Sodom? Every single morning, the first thing that they saw whenever they opened their tent was Sodom. Every morning. When they stopped for lunch, they saw Sodom in the distance. They heard the people. They heard the markets. They heard what was going on. At night, they tried to close their eyes to go to sleep because they can't go to sleep without their Sodom playing on the television. You got to have it. They were close enough to hear the music and the partying and the revelry. They heard it all. They saw the flickering lights of everything that was taking place, and it finally became too much for them. And then a man who the Bible says was a righteous man found his way buying property in the most evil city in the world. Why? Because he saturated his home with Sodom. They didn't live in Sodom at first. They just let Sodom come into their home. This is why it's important for us to preach this stuff. Second, and let me read this from 1 Thessalonians. I'm running out of time, but I just want to examine everything carefully. Hold fast to that which is good. Abstain from every form of evil. Now may the peace of God himself sanctify you entirely, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete without blame at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Examine everything carefully. Look at it. Second point, if you're not teaching about pornography in your youth group, you're already running late. The average age of exposure for pornography, 11 years old. By the time they come into a junior high class, it's too late. If you're not putting up guardrails, if you have kids, if you're not putting up guardrails on their digital devices already, say that's 6 years old, do it now. Do it now. Average age of exposure, 11 years old. 94% of children will see porn before the age of 14, 94%. And among those, this is an important stat. You got to listen to absorb it. 75% of parents surveyed thought that their child had not seen pornography online, but 94% of them saw it before they were 14 years old. There are two spikes in pornography traffic throughout the day. One is between 4 and 5 p.m., and the other is between 10 and 1 at night. Why? Because the first time it's when their parents have not yet come home, and they're at home alone for a little while. The parents who haven't come home from work. Then later, it's when the parents go to bed, 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. That's when they're absorbing it. We have to teach about this stuff. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an, and I quote, obsessive interest in pornography. We talk about divorce, but we blame everything else on it. 56% pornography played a crucial role in it. So that's why it's important that we get this into our kids' heads early. Say, y'all, listen, you cannot let this stuff grab hold of you. It can ruin your life 10, 15 years down the road. Don't let it grab hold of you now. So how do we address it? Proverbs 28:13. He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. Confession to God brings forgiveness. Confession to people brings healing, because then you have somebody to keep you accountable. You have somebody to help you bear this burden and to ask you, are you okay? Are you all right? And also, this is crucial. We have to tell parents, if your kid admits to you that they've been watching porn, tell your parents, I've told them face to face, before I tell them that their kid has absorbed porn and they want to talk to them about it, I tell the parents face to face, do not blow up on them, because then you shut the door to them ever being honest with you about it again. And let me tell you something. The ones who did not blow up, and there's one father, he told me, he said, I got to settle down because I've got a bad temper. And I said, I did not know that, but I'll take your word for it. And he said, I've got a bad temper. I've got to settle down. And so he settled down. He took a week. And then when he talked to his son, they sat down and they came up with a plan. And his son, as far as I know, for 2 years now, has not seen anything. But it's important for us to cut that off at the pass and say, parents, this is how we can address it together. We're going to help you with this. Software, Covenant Eyes, still popular, $16 a month. If somebody says, I can't afford $16 a month, ask them why they afford a $14 Netflix, but they can't afford the $16 Covenant Eyes. Goes on the computer, goes on the tablet, goes on the phone, everything. I get reports from Covenant Eyes all the time from the people that have signed up for it and made me their accountability partner. Tell them this stuff. I have a link that y'all can follow. You might have to write this down because we have a lot of resources online. We don't have time to go over them all. But our website is pobc.cc. I know it's a weird URL. /guardrails. And you're going to find a lot of resources that we posted and a lot of resources that are read from. Teach them. The other issue It's probably the last one that we're going to have time for before the Q&A. We might cover some of this other stuff, and I might bring it up for y'all. The other issue is the LGBT issue. And I don't say Q because at some point I had to stop naming letters. And they have added a lot more. This is the issue of our time. It's the issue of our time. We have to be aware of it. And not only that, we can't sweep it under the rug and act like it doesn't exist. Because if you're in youth ministry any amount of time today, you are going to encounter it. We've encountered it 3 times at home. You're going to encounter it. According to the CDC, around 0.6% of the population identifies as transgender. But from 2012 to 2020, in that 8-year gap, Americans identifying as LGBT rose from 3.5 to 5.6%. Generation Z, y'all's kids, our precious treasures that God has entrusted us with, 1 in 6 identify as some form of LGBTQ. I just added another letter. In California, and I know it's California, but California precedes what happens to the rest of the world in these matters. 27% of teenagers are gender nonconforming, saying that we do not identify as simply male or female. That rate is an outlier, but not by that much. In Louisiana, we had our former superintendent pass away. Before he passed away, T.F. Tenney said this. We asked him about this issue. How do we deal with this? And he said, I'll tell you this. He rocked back and forth for a long time, and then he looked at us and just said, I'll tell you this. I'm glad it's y'all being asked this question and not my generation. And that was the conversation. Because he said, I don't have an answer for you. We desperately need to not just think about this and read about it and pray about it. We need to pray that God gives our leaders wisdom, because I want our leaders to have the authority to tell us, listen, we've been praying and seeking God. We're coming up with a plan. I want God to impress our leaders. We need to come from the top down. We need God, and they need the anointing of God to help them do this, all of it. I spoke to a pastor in Georgia. He holds a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. His primary source of clients are children who deal with either depressive issues or gender issues. And so what he told me, I had a long conversation with him. What he told me is that 1/3 of his patients that suffered with gender issues, 1/3 of them had genuine gender dysphoria, to where from a young age they felt like they were in the wrong body. He said 2/3 of my clients, what I find out, they don't have genuine gender dysphoria. He said, if you want to put it in a way that kind of simplifies it, maybe oversimplifies it, he said they're going through a phase because they're desperate to find a reason. Why do I not fit in anywhere? And he said 2/3 of them don't know how to fit in at all. And he said that's where the crisis is happening. And it's happening primarily with our young girls. There's a book that if you want a resource on it, there's a book. I wrote it down. It's called Irreversible Damage. It's not a Christian book. It's called Irreversible Damage by a woman named Abigail Schreier. If you just look up Irreversible Damage book, it's going to pop up on Amazon. And if you want a little balance for you guys, it's not exactly the same issue, but it helps. It's called The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell. Warren Farrell, these 2 books I'd recommend. Again, they're not Christian books. They have information that we can plug into our biblical principles. They're looking for belonging, and the group that's being hit the most is not just young girls. It's young, undiagnosed autistic girls. And you say, how are they undiagnosed? Highly functioning, often would be considered what the diagnosis, they don't use it anymore, but the diagnosis used to be called Asperger's syndrome. There's no speech delay. People don't realize. They feel awkward and they feel like they don't quite fit in. That group is being swamped by this mentality. And so if we can identify some of this stuff at an earlier age and say, look, we're going to help you. We're going to help you. Then we stand a fighting chance of stamping this stuff out very early. But we need the direction of God. We need to pray because there's a lot of questions that come along with this. This is the last one we have. I've got 57 seconds, but I'm just going to cover this really quickly. This issue that we're dealing with right now more than anything else with our young people, depression, anxiety. These 2 issues, everywhere that I go, it's all we see. Depression and anxiety, and it's killing young people, literally. Depression, anxiety. According to a 2021 Mental Health America report, severe or clinical depression has increased in youth to 9.7% of the population. It also states that youth ages 11 to 17 were the most likely age group from birth to death to score in the moderate to severe depression categories. The Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, I'd never heard of it at the time, was associated after it aired the final episode in which the lead character commits suicide. After that episode, 28.9% increase in suicides among teenagers. Tell me that media is not important. It's because of something. It's suicide contagion is the name for it. Whenever somebody who already deals with depressive issues hears nothing but suicide, 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 and everybody talks about it and shows it, and they see a graphically depicted on the show, it makes them lean into those thoughts and finally carry through with it. Tell me that media is not important. And tell me it's not important for the church to invest heavily into recognizing and healing these issues. It's a variety of causes. I'm not going to go over those. Some of these notes we might can cover them if y'all want to go back to the depression in the Q&A. But young people right now, this is my final point. Young people right now, part of why you're seeing so much of it, yes, a lot of it does have to do with COVID. They've traced it back. I get it. The quarantine and the detachment, all that, yes. But young people are especially prone, if they feel isolated and alone, they are especially prone to assign themselves some sort of group identity because of the depression that they face. And this is going to sound insensitive. I'm telling you, I've seen this. There is a tendency to coddle what they refer to as my depression. They refer to it personally. This is my depression. No, this is our enemy. It's not my depression. I can speak with some modicum of authority on this issue because I've dealt with clinical depression since I was 11 years old. God didn't heal me of it. He gave me the tools to fight it. Fight it every day, and I win every day. So far, I'm undefeated. But our kids need our help desperately. This issue, they need our help. And when we get to a point where we don't know how to help them, for goodness sake, don't just stop and say, this is it. Get our kids to a counselor. If the church has to pay for it, beg the pastor. Beg, can we please help this kid get into counseling? We've done that at our church the past few years. We pay for 6 weeks of counseling. And what we found is that there's a pastor that's licensed. He's a licensed therapist. Unbelievable. He's part of the network that UPCI has to help address some of this stuff. But he comes to our church, and he just sees people throughout the day on Thursday. And he's made a difference. But we reached an impasse, and we said, look, I told our youth pastor, you and I, we're not licensed counselors. But we have access to a Christian man of God who is licensed, who is trained for this very purpose. Bring him in and help address some of these with our kids. We've got to do this stuff, y'all. We've got to do it. We've got to do it.